A couple of years ago, NPR host Rachel Martin did an interview with Rob Delaney, the comedian who co-starred and co-wrote the hit show Catastrophe. Delaney's youngest child was diagnosed with brain cancer after they'd wrapped season 2 of this show. And it soon became clear that Delaney would have to write and act in season 3 because the family needed the money for Henry's treatments. He was literally in the studio working while his boy was in the hospital. So let's take a sidebar here for a moment before I go on with that story and note that this was not a poor person having to make this heartbreaking decision. And let's acknowledge that if we designed our society to enable the flourishing of many and not to reward the greed of the few, we would not be living in a land where even well-off people would be forced to spend significant chunks of time away from an ill child in order to pay for that child's treatments. Nor would we be inhabiting a country where some are rich enough to personally fund our entire military during a government shutdown, while our Congress, which also continues to draw paychecks, allows SNAP benefits to run out on the 12% of Americans who literally need them to eat. The phrase morally disgusting comes to mind. Is there any doubt as to whom in our society Jesus would apply his words in today's gospel when he blesses the poor and the hungry and those who weep and who are hated and excluded, reviled and defamed in his name, while pronouncing woe on those who are rich and whose stomachs are full and who laugh and are well spoken of? This state of things will be reversed in God's coming kingdom, Jesus promises. The poor fed, the reviled loved, the rich cut down to size. And to that I say, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, and sooner rather than later, please. Amen. Okay, end of morally outraged digression. To be fair, Delaney actually expressed some relief that his work enabled him to focus for a time on something other than the nightmare of his ill child. But despite the surgery, which left Henry disabled, and the other treatments he received when the cancer came howling back, the boy died at just 2.5. I'm aware of what a privilege it is to even say that I don't know how you get through such a loss. But Delaney shared some very striking things about the experience. For one thing, he described a kind of intuitive knowledge arising for him and his wife that they had to practice relationship hygiene and stay connected so as not to add a failed marriage to the long march of their family life. Yet he can't account for how they recognized this. This is where I start to develop something similar to faith, he said, which I find very frightening, because it was something like grace that came into our home. Later, Martin wanted to know why he described this shift toward faith as frightening. Delaney talked about growing up Catholic, but no longer believing in a deity or certainly a humanoid God because, quote, a God created in our own image does such a disservice to the diversity and wonder of life. But, he said, I have felt palpable love. And when we die, he said, I think we're like glasses of individual water. I think we get poured back into a sea. When we're born, we're conceived or whatever, we're scooped out of the water and think we're separate or made of different stuff, maybe for a while, and then we get poured back in. So I think after we die, I think I'll be with Henry again, but he won't be Henry as I know him, and I won't be his dad as he knew him. We'll all be mingled together, wondering who's who and taking different forms and nebulae and dancing through the cosmos and evolving and changing. For what it's worth, I don't hear anything in these beliefs that would disqualify Delaney for membership in the Episcopal Church. In fact, he comes pretty close to voicing my own best guess about God in the afterlife. More important, though, notice how faith can emerge in the strangest times and the most tragic circumstances. It shows up as something like grace. It shows up as palpable love. It shows up as glasses that recognize the seawater of their shared essence. Today, we celebrate All Saints' Day. In its original biblical and early Christian meaning, saint refers to any member of the faithful, not just the famous ones about whom tales are written, not just your Peters, your Marys, your Pauls and Magdalenes, and later your Francises, Julians, Ignatiuses, Teresas, and even later your Nelson Mandelas, Cesar Chavezes, your Dorothy Days, and Philadelphia 11. No, saint also includes your neighbor, your cousin, that nice postal worker who gave your dog a treat, those folks who perished in a flood or a war or a pandemic in Jamaica or Gaza or Sudan or Ascension Hospital, your 2.5-year-old. That's the sense in which we use the word today. Say saint, and we see Isabel Mooney, the gentle soul who organized our knitting group. Say saint, and we see Bill Naughton, who hated meetings but would can do anything you asked. Say saint, and we see Marlene Otten, or Jane Foote's mother Sally, or my own mother Helen, or any number of Kirbys and Jansons and Vosses and Roberts and Balsers that we carry into this space in our hearts, whether we have shared their names and photos or not. We carry them in here because that's one place where they live, inside our hearts, until we too get poured back into the sea and mingled together, wondering who's who and taking different forms and nebulae and dancing through the cosmos and evolving and changing. We carry them in here with our acceptance and with our questions, with the exhausting grief we are wrestling until it blesses us, with our fears, with our solace, with the stories we use to arm ourselves against the unknown. And what of them are saints? They occupied this small blink on the very large timeline of human history, within the immensely more vast timeline of the earth, and at a scale beyond imagining the timeline of the universe itself. What could possibly be the meaning of these little lives, these brief sparks of light? Some of them, like Henry Delaney, only got a fraction of the full ride. But even the ones who lived a full life, how could they possibly matter? On a grand scale, I don't know. But I can tell you that they mattered to us. Their sparks were lit by other sparks, and then lit our sparks, which in turn will light future sparks. And next thing you know, there's an unbroken line of sparks like the tail of a comet, stretching back to the mysterious origins. Also, there's this. In his book, 4,000 Weeks, Oliver Burkeman points out the folly of always living our lives as a preparation for the next stage. School to get into college, college to get a good job for a better one, so as to eventually retire with ease. And meanwhile, that better job helps us with kids to bring up a new generation to join in the constant chase for some future arrival that never actually arrives. Before you know it, our cups are pouring back into the sea. But Berkman rejects this unending pursuit for an appreciation of what is holy now, even for children like Henry Delaney. He quotes Tom Stoppard's play, The Coast of Utopia, in which a character grieving his son's death insists that the child's life was no less valuable for never coming to fruition in adult accomplishments. And I'll leave you with the quote. Because children grow up, we think a child's purpose is to grow up, this character says. But a child's purpose is to be a child. Nature doesn't disdain what only lives for a day. It pours the whole of itself into each moment. Life's bounty is in its flow.